Top of the morning to ye. Howdy, everybody. Today I want to talk a little bit about ceremonial magic. Maybe a little bit about initiation as well. We'll see how this little talk turns out. So, I know there's a lot of misconceptions around the world, and a lot of the maybe I'll get demonetized for that quick little cover song there. Ceremonial magic. One of the misconceptions that I see constantly is especially people who are into the conspiracy theory world talking about Saturn worship. Because here's the thing you have to understand about Saturn worship. Saturn worship is not a thing. Nobody worships Saturn. Black magicians don't worship Saturn. Black magicians worship themselves. That's why they're black magicians. They may use Saturnian energies. And why is that? Why do black magicians prefer to use Saturn over, I know, Mercury or Venus or things like that? The whole thing you have to understand is this is all using, all of these ideas use a structure, the real world magic system. This isn't Dragon Ball Z, this isn't, I don't know, Avatar The Last Airbender or some crap. You have to understand what the real world magic system is. And the real world's magic system's, its backbone is Neoplatonic, and then it's got all these weird medieval influences that have this kind of, Neoplatonic is in there are many levels. God is at the top, or there's something at the top that continuously is like an overflowing cauldron that just lets out energy continuously, and that energy flows out and flows into the dimension underneath it, and then it fills that dimension, then, you know, it cascades out of that dimension, then flows into the one underneath that, and there's this hierarchy of dimensions that then have all of these different variants of energy and beings and becomings in those specific dimensions. So, and those dimensions are the internal worlds, the other worlds, the hidden worlds of all of the traditions that you see around the world. And so you can the image that's usually selected is something like one of those fancy fountains where there's just different discs, there's different tiers, and water collects in one disc and flows into the next and into the next and into the next. That's how occultists see the world. The world isn't just the world or existence is a ladder. And magic is a way to climb that ladder, or to perhaps manipulate things here and now via using the quirk of the existence of that ladder. So ceremonial magic operates via doing some kind of act or ritual or operation that manipulates something, that moves something in the internal worlds. Because the idea is everything that you see physically is merely the emanation of something that started or began in the internal world. So if you can, like, it's the mind-body thing, like, does the mind influence the body or does the body influence the mind? They both influence each other. So we are influenced by things in the internal worlds, but you can also influence the internal worlds if you're conscious of them and if you're conscious of the rules and the laws that govern them. So the idea is in ceremonial magic you do this operation and you manipulate something in the internal world, and then that has an effect on something which in the internal worlds, which then eventually emanates down and has an effect in the physical. That's a very, very rudimentary understanding of how ceremonial magic works. So, why do black magicians work with Saturn? So when you look at all of the planets, or the 7 traditional planets, which includes the sun, so you look at first of all, why didn't they work with the sun? The sun is the powerhouse. The sun is the powerhouse of the solar system. It's got the most energy. It gives off the most force. Why don't you work with that? And it's to do with analogy and correspondence. The sun is a light giver, light bringer. It continuously ushers, you know, light and life onto the planet. Its sympathy, its analogy, is something closer to God or the Christ if you're a mystical Christian or something like that. It's clearly related to a more higher power. So you don't, if you're a black magician, you don't want to work with the sun per se. I mean, you can. In a sense, they're energies that are bound they're conscious, but you can manipulate them in a certain mechanical way. But at the same time, to work with some of these angels or beings, you need a certain degree of purity, which black magicians just lack. So they're not going to work with the sun. It's too close to God via analogy. What about Mercury? Yeah, there may be black magicians of Mercury that want to strengthen their mind, their mental powers, to learn things quicker, etc., etc. What about Venus? Yeah, there may be some black magicians that work with the energies of Venus to manipulate people through their emotions, to produce like dark art, like art that doesn't edify man but denigrates man, and to also manipulate, erotically bind people, erotic binding spells, which people call like love potions, and they're not really love potions because it's not real love. You're controlling someone's will. So there's black magicians that possibly work with those forces. What about the Martian forces? Martian and Saturn forces, I would say they're the main ones that black magicians probably work with. Martian forces being obvious, the forces of war, the forces of conflict and tension. What about Jupiterian forces? Jupiterian forces, or the planet Jupiter, is said to regulate laws and kingship. So politics is regulated via the energy of Jupiter. So yeah, there's definitely going to be black magicians working with that. But then what about Saturn? Saturn is the ray of death. Saturn regulates death. There are angels who are attributed to all of these planets, but they also have their antithesis. Their antithesis are the demons. And so usually with Saturn, the antithesis of the angel of Saturn is the demon Moloch. And then this is where you see things like, the Illuminati worshipping the owl. Remember, anyone who who's just like, yeah man, there's see the eye in the American dollar bill? That's like the Illuminati, bro. No. The eye is a Masonic symbol, and the Masons and the Illuminati are two completely different secret societies. Along the way, for some reason, they just got conflated. The symbols got conflated, and just when you see the eye, it's like Illuminati. No, the eye was never an Illuminati symbol. I want to repeat, the eye was never an Illuminati symbol. The original Bavarian Illuminati, their symbol was the owl of Minerva, because they thought they were better than everyone else. They thought they were the illuminated ones. So the owl of Minerva, which is the Roman goddess of wisdom, they are more wise than all the rest. They deserve to be the philosopher kings, and we should all be the whelps and serfs just tending the fields. That's how they see the world. So it's the owl of Minerva, which is then inverted and becomes the owl of Moloch that you sacrifice to. So then how... So then they... Okay, so that's why they work. That's why you see a lot of Saturn imagery, because yes, there is an angel that corresponds to Saturn, but if you're working with the negative side of Saturn, which is Moloch, the demon of death and abortion and miscarriages, it's the reason why someone has a miscarriage. That's like Moloch, basically playing with that person's life. He's preventing that child from being born. He eats the children. So, that kind of dark entity. That's Moloch, and so they work with that. And it's also said, because the other planet, the planets can give gifts. Mercury can give great intelligence. Venus can give you a lover. Jupiter can give you great riches and great fame and outstanding in life. It can give you titles. But it said, like particularly in response to Jupiter, it's said that the gifts that Jupiter gives you are always impermanent, like riches. Then you gain it and then you spend it, and that's it. Whereas Saturn, the gifts that you get from Saturn are permanent. So this is the other reason why black magicians enjoy or prefer to work with Saturn, because it's a high toll, a high sacrifice, but once you work with it, once you get the result you want, it's permanent. It's something solid. It's something that can't be changed. And so then you gain dominance. If you want dominance over a person, or you just want to kill someone, or you want to gain some kind of change within yourself, you work with Saturn. Like, I want to die to this defect. I'm tired of being weak. I'm tired of being afraid. Saturn, devour my fear. And you can kind of do practices like that. It's almost psychological, like a Jungian individuation practice, but something else is coming in and like devouring a part of yourself. So to unchain yourself. So instead of you developing yourself to overcome it, you get something to take away a barrier from you. So there's no triumph. So there's this kind of thing, like black magicians are all kind of weedy and they look kind of off, and a lot of black magicians descend into vampirism then, because they don't have energy, so they need to steal it from other people. That's what vampirism is. Or true vampires need to sustain themselves because they can't develop in themselves the thing that living people naturally have, and living people naturally waste it now anyway. So people waste their energy all the time, and psychic explosions of anger, they lose a ton of emotional energy, and continuously being obsessed with, I don't know, a certain conspiracy theory that goes nowhere will expend your mental energy, or continuously obsessed with a specific political doctrine that goes nowhere or is useless to man, expends intellectual energy, frivolously wasting your physical energy or your sexual energy, etc., etc. All of these energies are important to maintain and to balance, and you can then aim and develop those energies for a certain purpose. Develop the man, develop the lower self to a certain point where he can connect with something higher. That's the real work of an initiate who trains to walk the path, who trains to connect to higher realms. Because that's the true path of magic, isn't to gain, powers in the physical. It's to gain dominion over the physical, so that then you can use the physical as kind of a springboard to then kick into another world. To be initiated is to, to connect to something entirely new. When you go to university, you get initiated into a fraternity, or if you join something like an army military corps or a police corps or something, you get initiated into something. Or an academic group, you get initiated into it. But there's this idea of esoteric initiation. You get initiated into another world, into the internal worlds, into something completely different. Something's hidden from 99.99% of the population. That's the true idea of magic, or the path of magic. So this kind of game of sympathy or ceremonial magic that you see, and I mean, I'm kind of knocking it, but there's white ceremonial magic. And what's that about then? So you know how you go to psychic fairs and you buy like a crystal Bible or some crap, and you look at the crystals and they sometimes have correspondences to planets, like a ruby corresponds to Mars, and it's like, why is that? It's not because the ruby's red and Mars is the red planet. It's said the reason why all of those correspondences come from medieval authors, like Heinrich Agrippa, who wrote the 3 books of occult philosophy. So those correspondences are to do with sympathy and analogy. It means that herb or that animal or that stone or that metal or that crystal has a correspondence with that planet because it's influenced by that planet. It's connected. It's like a condenser. Just how the dimensions absorb energy from on high, there are things on this planet that are like energy condensers for celestial energy. And so there's animals for that as well, like, a crow corresponds to Saturn, or horses and eagles correspond to Jupiter, or a lion corresponds to the sun, or certain birds correspond to Mercury, a swan corresponds to Venus, etc., etc., etc. There are all these correspondences, and so the idea of celestial rays is these things on the planet condense celestial rays into them. So if you want to work with a planet, you can do it through meditation and concentration, and concentrating on that planet and invoking the angel of that planet. Or you can increase the practice, make it more potent by, if you want to work with Mars, you use like a red candle, or you deck the room out in red, you dress in red, you put red drapes up, that kind of thing. And so that actually increases the sympathy. You put a little ruby on your altar with some iron or something. That increases the sympathetic potency. So when you do that Martian ritual, you gain more energy. More celestial rays hit you in that practice, and your willpower that wants something to be done, it has more energy to manipulate and work with. And so that thing that you want to change, that wants to happen, that force that then moves in the internal worlds to get something done, can happen much quicker or have a much greater effect. That's the idea behind that. That's why you see ceremonial magicians decking themselves out with all kind of odd things like certain number squares and certain sigils or sigils that have these things have correspondences with the planetary energy that they're working with. This is the connection of, you could say, certain things like astrology and astronomy with magic. So why do they use animals then? So animals are also condensers of these celestial planetary energies, but they're huge amounts of energy. So you can deck out your room with like a lot of red stuff and red robes and a ruby, or you can just get an animal. Like if you want to work with Saturn, you could just get, instead of wearing black, then a black candle, an onyx stone, onyx drapes, you can just get a crow and you can just sacrifice it. Because the idea is if an animal dies naturally, the celestial energies, the celestial rays that have condensed into it will dissipate out of it slowly. But if you kill it, then a titanic amount of energy is released all at once in that kind of spark, that moment. Oh, fuck, I hit the table. Jesus Christ. So a spark is kind of, or like that energy just ushers out really intensely. So if you get a crow and you want to work with Moloch, or you can just like stab it open and like cut it open, and boom, the energy just kind of flows out, and you can just do that. So then what about human sacrifice? So this is the thing about black magic. Humans are condensers for all of the celestial energies. Humans are very unique in that regard. We condense all of the energies. We're the best. This is why this is one of the esoteric things about man. Man isn't really an animal in the occult sense. Science now is like, oh yeah, man is just a part of the animal. No. There's the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the kingdom of man. We're on a different rung of the ladder. We're actually a different thing. We're just degenerated now. We're so degenerated now, we're basically animals. You could say we're just intellectual animals. But, back in the day when we had faculties and powers, we were closer to the gods. We were much more godlike than we are now. We've just kind of fallen. But we are still energy condensers, and by far the best energy condensers on the planet. So if you get a human, and if you get a human that's very pure, and you huge, titanic, colossal amount of energy is released all at once. So then if you have a group of people who are all aiming their minds and their wills at the same time for the same thing, for the same purpose, to manipulate some forces in the internal worlds, which will then emanate and have their effect in the physical, you can then start to see why certain rituals then kind of make sense, or you hear certain you hear certain things about satanic rituals or human sacrifice. It's like, why would they do that? It's like, this is the logic, or this is the system. This is the mechanics and the reason behind why they do the things that they do. So they have an aim. The aim of the black magician is to stay in the planet and to materialize people as much as possible. So what do I mean by that? So when we were talking, I want to talk about more about initiation now, but perhaps I should mention counter-initiation. Counter-initiation is something very interesting. So think of it like this. So if you're a materialist, I'm not going to bother convincing you, but if you have even an inkling, just follow along, or if you are an open-minded person, just follow along. Understand this. Magic exists. Magic is real, okay? And there is a spell that has been cast on humanity. A magic circle is around humanity at the moment, and that within that circle, no magic can happen. So what happens in the circle, in that magic circle, where no magic can happen? Well, people become materialistic. People become, atheists. I don't believe not only in God, but I don't even believe in anything spiritual. I don't even believe that I am a spiritual being. I'm just this meat sack. I'm this here. I'm in here. I'm this brain in this body, and I'm not connected to anything else. When I die, I die. And so then there's no point for living. So I may as well just be a good person and just live life from sensation to sensation. And then, prop up my existence with maybe something like Stoic philosophy or Zen philosophy, so people think I'm #deep, but actually there's nothing really holding my foundation together. That is the spell that has been cast on humanity. And that is the type of human that is cultivated within this magic circle. But the problem is magic does exist, and no matter how much energy is put into this spell, it can't maintain itself. Cracks will always appear. Things will always get through. No matter how hard you try, that can't happen. There are going to be people who just spontaneously have memories of past lives, or some people who have half faculties awake. And even if you ridicule them and scorn them as much as you can, people begin to gather, people begin to talk. And then as soon as it's one of those things, the magic circle, the thing that they're trying to produce, that would matter and nothing else, it's a lie. And so you can intellectualize it all you want, but deep down inside, it's like there's this thing inside us that knows that that's a lie. And so when there's this break, there's little light kind of starts poking through. People begin to wonder. And so there are people who wander outside of the magic circle. And so what is counter-initiation? Counter-initiation is to make sure that people who get outside of the circle, that they go down. So I remember being a kid and thinking it's weird how, there's no movies with kind of, I don't know, how would you put it, angels or higher powers or gods. I mean, if there's gods, then they're all kind of like the Greek gods. They're all like dumb idiots, or they're licentious, or they're basically just humans with powers. They're not real gods. They're not godlike. And it's there's nothing like that. And that even, that whole atheist thing, it's you believe in angels and God, they ridicule you. But what about ghosts or demons? Well, that's completely okay. Let's all watch horror movies. Horror movies are great. Let's watch about demons and death. And all horror movies have this thing where it's there's an astral realm and it's filled with ghosts and deceased and murderers, and there are even witches and demons. But there's none of the opposite of that. There's no, battle between heavenly and demonic forces. There's just demonic forces. Or in Hellraiser, you see Pinhead and he comes up and he's like, "What are you, a demon or something?" And it's a demon to some, an angel to others. And it's it's all just words. It's all just concepts. There's actually just demons. This is this other layer, that there's no light. There's nothing above. Don't bother going up. It's if you get out of the magic circle, then immediately they try to get you to go down. And it's if you type magic into Google, what's the first thing you find? People talking about love potions or get rich quick schemes, use magic to get money or something. Obviously, you have a spiritual inkling. You know that there's something more. There's an intuition, an instinctual impulse within you. But then all of a sudden, it's just they immediately try to materialize you, even they try to materialize you with something spiritual. It's diabolical. It's genius. You kind of got to give it to the black magicians in a way. They're kind of geniuses if you look at the setup of what they've got nowadays. So you have to understand that that's the situation we're in now. That there's this magic circle, and most people just don't care, and some people are even completely hostile to the idea. And then on top of that, you have people who do leave the circle, but then they just go down. They just get lost in degeneration despite that. So that's counter-initiation, and you want to try and counter that with true initiation then, to be truly initiated. So we hear initiation, and then what do people think of when you say the word initiation, or esoteric occult initiation? What do you think of when I say those words? Most people think of something like the Freemasons. And maybe that's a good place to start. Maybe if you know a little bit more, the Rosicrucians, or Martinism, or maybe you're associated with some kind of para-occult organization in that sense, or something like, Gnosticism, or maybe you're a part of an actual spiritual lineage, like a yogic lineage. You're an initiate into a yogic lineage, or a Buddhist, a Vajrayana Buddhist lineage or something. So you have this understanding, this idea about initiation. So the idea about initiation or physical world initiation, esoteric initiation, it's also based off of that idea that everything that happens in the physical has an internal correspondence. So the idea is there'd be a probationary phase where you're tested and you do this work, or you develop something within you, maybe some virtues, you purify yourself. And then you go through this physical world initiation. And the idea is the physical corresponds to the higher. So going through it physically, something happens internally, or because there's something already happening internally. So maybe your dreams change. Maybe something happens. You wake up a faculty. So like our organs, like have sensors attached to them. So our we have sight, which is a physical sense connected to our eyes, ears, hearing, but we also have psychic organs that have atrophied within us. So going through certain purifications and certain workings and doing certain techniques regenerates or activates or agitates certain faculties that we have. And so these may activate as we go through initiation, or they may not. It just depends. So this is what true esoteric initiation is. So the true esoteric initiation, or the path of magic, implies this type of initiation. But once again, because of the way the world is, a lot of orders that are, magical, mystical, operational orders, they've themselves have kind of degenerated. So, oh shit, I'm so unprofessional, I knocked my microphone again. Okay. So the whole thing is, we need initiation, but you can't necessarily rely on physical world initiation. So what do? You have to rely on internal initiation. So what's all this talk? We've spoken about black magicians, but there's also there's also white magicians. The law of opposites. If there's one thing, then the opposite must exist. This is why I don't get Satanists who truly believe in Satan but don't believe in God. It's like, there has to be an opposite. The universe cannot be unbalanced. They're just, whatever. The Satanists, Luciferians, whatever. They're doing their thing. Just leave them. So there is something called a white magician. There is something, or an awake being, if you want to put it. People have awakened. People have changed themselves. People have transformed themselves. When they die, they no longer are unconscious and just mechanically, walk through a zodiacal gate and wake up in a new life and forget their past life. There are some people who can maintain their consciousness after death, and indeed they live in a completely other place outside of this world after death. Maybe they look down on the world and they try to help this humanity. Maybe they incarnate at certain points in history to aid humanity or to give teachings back to the world. But to someone who's in this position, what does the world look like? The world isn't, if you're in a higher dimension, what is the world in a lower dimension? It's just like, when we look at ants, playing with rocks, we're just kind of like, what are they even doing? Whereas, they're looking at us on this big rock playing with our devices, or, arguing over resources, or arguing over ideologies, or what's right, and they're just kind of looking at us like, what are you doing, bro? Nothing. Almost everything in this life is completely irrelevant to them. To them, the planet is just a garden bed with seeds, and all of humans are seeds. So whenever they incarnate just to give teachings, really. Those great beings that incarnate, and sometimes they have to guise themselves as spiritual teachers. Some maybe attempt to do other things. Some may attempt to become great kings and institute some kind of political society, some kind of society that actually is an esoteric society, where it's ruled by initiates, people who have awakened consciousness and faculties. Sometimes that may be attempted, but definitely not nowadays. Definitely nowadays the Black Lodge is reigning supreme on this planet. But they're still there. They're still there in the higher worlds looking down and like, man, these humans are... it ain't looking good for them, but they're still there, and they're still willing to help if you're willing to do the work. So if you begin to work esoterically, if you begin to hold on to your energies and balance yourself, to self-observe yourself, to individuate, whatever you want to call it, individuate, seek enlightenment, to develop within yourself an I, An eye that's always awake and aware within yourself, that's observing your internal world, that's transforming the subconsciousness into consciousness. If you're really sincerely trying, you will connect to these beings, and they will try to wake you up while you sleep. So sometimes, most people when they dream, they just dream. They just either have weird dreams or they repeat what they do in their day. But you may begin, if you actually start a process, you may begin to naturally have weird, almost like you don't understand what they are, but they're initiatic dreams, or sometimes the word is called an oniric experience. These dreams are so important. And, there's an infinite type of them, an infinite different variety of them. Even maybe different cultures, they're different. Maybe even different races will have them differently. But in the end, we're all beings. We're all essences. We're all humans. So there are some that are somewhat universal. So to go through these dreams, to go through these experiences as if you are someone who's sincerely on the path, some dreams that you may have that are indicators are, so you could say these are like the minor mysteries that we go through in the astral realm. Because if you are sincerely working, what happens is superior beings come to you. And you know how, I know, every now and then I listen to someone in the New Age group who are astral projectors, and they'll say things, or sometimes you may meet someone and they say, oh, I had this interesting dream. And they talk about how there's someone in their dream who's very tall. And it's like, yeah, there's people who are really tall, and they took me into a room and they gave me a white shirt with a number 5 on it. And it's like, oh, that's so symbolic. That's so initiatic. Or like a really tall person coming, because it's symbolic. It's like a developed person. It's a giant. The giants, the angels, the fallen ones. These are people who were once human, who had developed themselves. And they're now in the astral world trying to help us. So it's like, it's so good if you kind of have these dreams. I remember one really odd one, a famous one that you can actually look up. There's a guy called, I think this is him. There's a guy called like W.E.A. Budge or something. And he is, if you study like ancient Egypt and even stuff in the ancient Middle East, you know who this guy is. He's like one of those ancient Egyptologists, but he was like the OG guy, one of these OG guys who published like a lot of books. I think maybe the original Egyptian Book of the Dead that was like published for mass consumption, or it's got his name on it. He's like the translator, and he has this story where he was going for the job. He was fresh out of uni, and he was going for a job at a museum to become like the chief rector of their artifacts or whatever, some bullshit. And he's going for this job, and the job interview's tomorrow, and he's like sweating. So he's just studying. He's doing his last night cramps. You know what I mean? And he's like reading all this stuff and doing all this stuff, and then he goes to sleep. And he says this in an interview that he had a dream. And in this dream, he's in like this room, and it's kind of this grey room, and it's got a skylight. And then he says the door opens, and this really tall guy walks in. And this tall guy walks up to him and hands a stone to him. And the stone's got a specific script on it. And he says, you need to study the script. And he starts studying, and he realizes it's like Neo-Assyrian, or I can't quite, I'm like paraphrasing this story hardcore. It's like Neo-Assyrian or ancient Neo-Assyrian from the post-Babylon era or some bullshit. And he realizes what it is, and he starts to translate it in this dream. And he's like going through it like, yeah, okay. And then he wakes up. And he's like, oh, that was a weird dream. I must have been studying so much that I just had a dream about studying. And then he goes to the study halls. He goes to this museum, and they take him to this room that he's never been before. And it's like, oh, here's the test room. And they open the door, and it's kind of like a grey room, nothing on the walls. There's just a table in the middle of the room, and there's a skylight. And he's like, huh, just like my dream. And then he sits down on the table, and they gave him a piece of paper. And on the piece of paper is a picture of basically a tablet from an archaeological site. And they say, okay, you got to translate the script on this tablet. And he looks at the tablet, and it's literally the stone he was given in his dream with the script on it. And he's like, holy shit. And so he just starts immediately translate translates this like ancient Assyrian script, and then just hands it back to the guy. It's like, there we go, done. And he just gets the job, and it's like, boom, boom. And that's just one of those, a magic dream kind of things. But the thing that always struck me is the presence of a really tall guy. So you can kind of have dreams like that being directed by tall people. That's like the internal initiators of humanity. So these are the people who initiate us. And sometimes there's one initiatic dream called the Guardian of the Threshold, or sometimes it's called the Test of the Mirror. If you want to know kind of, or have a kind of a flavor of this, you can study. There are some people who talk about it, like Franz Hartmann talks about it, Steiner talks about it. He says there are two guardians, the lesser guardian and the greater guardian. The lesser guardian's at the beginning of the path, and the greater guardian comes at like near the end of the path, or like a more advanced part. And some other authors say that there's actually like three guardians, one for the astral, one for the mental world, and one for the causal world, and whatnot. But if you want a good description of the Guardian of the Threshold, you can read the book Zanoni by Edward Bulwer Lytton. In that book, there's a really good description. So what is the Guardian of the Threshold? And why is it called the Test of the Mirror? So the idea is there is a monster inside you. And that monster is made out of every single bad thought, every single negative emotion you've ever had. Every time you have a negative emotion, like a little atom of energy just goes and connects to that monster and makes it bigger. And it said that, when you have dreams as a kid and you're being chased by a giant monster, that's that thing. That's the Guardian of the Threshold. It's chasing. Because as kids, we're natural. Children naturally have kind of half faculties. Well, maybe not nowadays, but especially nowadays they give them tablets and Coke and they're freaking. You see a kid in a pram with like an iPad and a Coke, and you're just like, ugh. Like nowadays, probably not, but kids have almost faculties naturally awake sometimes. And so children sometimes naturally wake up in the astral world, but they just don't realize that they're there. And, they go flying and doing things. And, sometimes they wake up and I had weird dreams where I was like awake. I was wandering around my house and I saw my dad watching TV, and it's like, and they tell that to their dad in the morning. It's like, I was watching TV last night. That's very weird, son. It's like some kids literally have faculties awake. They just, don't know. And so some kids, they wake up, go into the astral, and they get chased by their own inner demon, the own Guardian of the Threshold. And a kid can't pass that test because it's a giant monster. What are you going to do? But the whole point of that test is to take responsibility of what you've created. In other words, to take responsibility for your defects. A lot of people, they get, when they get things wrong in life, or when they're caught out, or if they're confronted with how they really are in a situation. Some people's like, man, you're always late. You're always late to gatherings, and they're like, no, man, I'm never late. People can't admit that they have certain attributes. So the Guardian is that test that you can take responsibility, or that you have the courage to face yourself, your own inner demons, your own inner darkness. So people who fail that, they don't go beyond that. That's just period. I remember meeting a guy once. I was with a group of friends, and they were all normies. And we're out having dinner somewhere, and we're all talking about dreams. And this one guy comes out with this massive one. It was amazing. And he's like, oh yeah, I had this one dream once where I was in this plain, like a field, and I was running through this field, and there was a great monster chasing me. And he said, like, it was chasing me, and I was scared, and I was running away. And then he says, and then from behind the sun, a giant lion jumps out, lands in front of him, roars, scares the monster away, and then looks at him and says, you're not ready this life. And then it goes asleep. And then he walks up to the lion, crawls into its mane, and then falls to sleep in the mane. And in real life, I'm like, oh, cool, you met Aslan in your dreams. But in my head, I'm like, holy shit. This guy failed the Guardian of the Threshold. This guy's he was a very nice person, very decent human being, possibly maybe just naturally living a pure life. Something was, developing in him just naturally. I said kids naturally have faculties, but he failed. He didn't have any strength within him. And so what the lion is really his higher self, the sun, the ever-flowing light. That the sun, the solar force, is that's a symbol of God within you, your higher self, your higher being, your innermost. That's the thing we want to fuse with. We want to go to the high. We want to go We want to go to the aim of magic is to get to the 7th dimension and then fuse with your inner God. Divinify man, and to humanize God is the aim of that path. So he's basically kind of woke up in the astral, got chased by his guardian, and then his higher self came down from the 7th dimension and was like, nah, bro. Nah. And so the higher self went to sleep. Because the higher self, you think everyone has a higher self. No one is never alone. But if you're failing in life, you've got to understand the higher self is a being outside of time and space that has a chronology completely different to us. So it can see, from now to like say 10,000 lives to where we're actually interested in doing the work and we achieve something. It can see all of that almost at once. And so if you're not working in this life, it's like, what's the point? If you begin to work, you could say there's almost like a rope in us that extends to somewhere in the future where we're enlightened. And every time we do a meditation or a ritual, or we introvert an introspection, a reflection, a deep reflection exercise, or an exercise of active imagination, every time we do something that goes towards that work of trying to connect with that, trying to work mystically and magically, it's like we tug that rope a little bit and pull our perfect self from the future closer to us. Like there's a very interesting line in a Taoist book, The Secret of the Golden Blossom, where they talk about a transmutation exercise, and they talk about this visualization of when you're meditating and you're breathing, you imagine like the energy moving up your spine and then coming down and collecting into the chest cavity here. And they talk about that, and it's like, if you do that 15 minutes a day, it dissolves 10,000 lives. And I remember reading that and being like, that's an interesting thing to say. So your being looks at you, and if you're failing, your being's just gonna, why would it bother looking at you? So it will just go to sleep and wait for a future epoch when its essence, its soul, is ready to do the work. That's what it will do. But if you do begin working, it's said that you create light, and like attracts like. So the initiates in the astral, the adepts, will begin to notice you, and your higher self will begin to awaken. You'll begin to like open an eye, and then it'll be like, oh, hello. My incarnated essence on the planet Earth is actually doing something. Oh my God, does this guy have potential? So as you begin to work, higher forces begin to activate and begin to start participating in your work. There's a connection. When you look at the top of the Sistine Chapel, you see like that famous picture of like Adam, and he's like reaching up, and then God's reaching down, and all of the atheists are like, oh my God, God is a brain. He's saying that there is no God and it's all in your head. No, they're dumb. God is the universal mind. But the main reason I mentioned that is God is reaching down, but remember, Adam is also reaching up. We need to put in some kind of effort to reach that point, to connect with that. So that's very important. So we can have this dream with this guardian of the threshold, and we need to overcome it. We need to have the courage. We need to have the responsibility to overcome it. Another book that actually, I'm just remembering now, that actually has the guardian of the threshold in it, funnily enough, is Carlos Castaneda. I think it's the second one, A Separate Reality, where his like sorcerer teacher is like wants to make him face it, and he fails that. He actually fails it. It's quite funny, and he's like, we're gonna have to do some different things, and like maybe he has to do something later. But it's quite interesting. It's very interesting. So there's the guardian of the threshold is one that's pretty universal. The next things that are universal are the elemental tests, and these tests are the tests of the elements. So you may have dreams where you have to walk through fire. Like you may have to walk through a path, path of hot coals, or like there may be a winding path in a forest that's just on fire, and you have to walk through it. That could be a thing. So it's like the idea of this is, are you going to react to the flames of life, or will you respond to the flames, to bitterness, to scorn, with serenity and sweetness? So this is an attribute. So people who, someone can be yelling at them and they can still remain calm. That's someone who's passed the test of the fire. That's someone who has the virtues and characteristics developed in them that they can pass the test of the fire in the astral. So there's fire, and then there'd be water, earth, and wind. Earth and wind. So water, test of the water is usually going through a huge body of water. And sometimes, a huge body of water, there's huge waves going up. You think you're going to sink and drown, but you keep swimming. You keep swimming to the other side until you reach the beachhead. And they can even be, big demons or big sea creatures, monsters in the ocean. All of these things trying to scare you, all of these huge waves coming at you. But you just have to keep on swimming. Keep having determination to keep swimming. And eventually you get to the end, and that's you could say the test of the water, or a test of the water. You think you're drowning, but you have to keep going. Just keep going. That test of the water is to do with adaptability. So people who are really fluid, people who can just adapt, especially in social circumstances. People who are really good in like a social circumstance, like maybe someone makes fun of them, but then they're able to turn it around, but in a way that doesn't insult the other person and actually like makes everybody laugh, and then everyone becomes friends, and they can just, they're natural born leaders, people who are really good leaders, or just they're adaptable in certain circumstances, who can lead in kind of a group. And not leaders that just, what I mean, natural born leaders, someone who's just like a staunch leader who just has dominion over everyone, and everyone like a cult master obeys them. No. Someone who's a proper leader, who has initiative, who has that social dynamic. That type of adaptability, that characteristic is that person will pass the test of the water easy. But these are tests to test our character. And so these are the kinds of the attributes that the internal masters want, that the type of person the internal masters want to kind of develop. These are certain things that we need to have. Because if you're not a developed person, if you're just some kind of simp incel who hates the world, and you wake up clairvoyance, or you awaken some kind of power or faculty, well, what are you gonna do with it, or what are you gonna become? Either you're going to awaken and you're just going to see into the internal worlds, and like attracts like, you're just going to see demons and go insane, or you're going to become an asshole. Kind of like, this is a bad example, but do you know the movie Megamind with like Will Ferrell as the blue guy? But the whole premise of that movie is he's the evil, and there's this superhero kind of guy who he actually defeats. And so he's the evil villain, he actually wins and takes over the city, but then he's like, what do I do now? And he just gets really depressed. So he tries to make like a new person. He tries to make another superhero. So he just gets an injection to give someone superpowers, but he accidentally injects it in just some fat ginger kid. And the fat kid's like just a guy. He's simping after the hot reporter, and there's nothing wrong about him. He's not a criminal. He's not evil at all. But the thing is, he lacks virtue. And so when this guy who completely lacks virtue gets given basically the powers of a god, he gets indestructibility, he's able to fly, he shoots like lasers out of his eyes. What does he do? He just becomes lazy, he just does what he wants, and then when he gets angry, he just goes on a tirade. He just destroys buildings, he kills people. Who knows how many lives he would just put out just by snuff out, just because he can. He's a complete child. So they want people who are developed psychologically, spiritually, ethically developed. You need to develop your character. There's the reason why the symbol of the magus, the mage, the magician, the wizard is always a wise old man, is because it's that person with that experience. To talk about Kabbalah again, in the original schools of Kabbalah, they wouldn't teach you unless you were 40 years old minimum, and you were like married for a certain amount of years. You were responsible. In the the golden age of masonry, you couldn't become a Freemason unless you got touted for by someone else, saying that you were a responsible and moral individual with a moral center. So all of these things are applicable. So fire, water, the test of the air is almost a test of non-attachment. People who really struggle, I've noticed astrologically, people who are Tauruses really struggle with the test of the air, because they're very material people, kind of Cancers as well, people who like to grab and hold on to material things, people who can't let go. You need to be able to let go of things, both emotionally and intellectually. If you have an idea that's wrong, you have to give it up. It's wrong. You have to find the truth. If you are addicted to the truth, you have to find it. And, you know, emotional baggage is not good. That weighs you down. And, you know, physical things as well. You have to not fear poverty. So the test of the air is usually in the astral. It's falling. People who fly, people who are very casual, who have this very easily, maybe they have flying dreams naturally. They're people who don't need to do the test of the air, or they've already passed it. Some people have hella falling dreams, or they have dreams where they're at a precipice and they have to jump, but they're just afraid. They look down at the deep kind and they just have vertigo and they're like, oh, and they can't do it. So those people fail the test of the air. Test of the earth is fortitude, endurance. It's you're getting crushed by two boulders, or, you know, you're in a dark cavern and you think it can fall on you at any minute, but you still persist and you go deeper into the cave. That's the test of the earth. To have endurance, to have fortitude, to keep kind of working even though dire situations are around you, to keep working even under pressure. That's the attributes that someone needs to have to pass the test of the earth. So there's the guarding of the threshold, and then there's these elemental tests. And then after that, there are 3 other things that the masters, before, you know, fully awakening you, or before you fully awaken, or before they start, you know, proper teaching you internally, there are 3 things that mainly they want developed within, like, an acolyte, or someone who then become a servant of the White Lodge. So what these next tests are tests to do with willpower, tests to do with passions, and tests to do with, how should we say it? Oh, what's the proper phrase? Perhaps like obedience. No, that would be the wrong way to put it. Fear. It's fear. Fear, passion, and willpower. These are the 3 things that you're kind of tested on. And so these aren't 3 tests. It's said that some people say that you're tested 7 times, or some people say there are 9 arcades that you have to pass through in the internal temples or the internal castles. But these tests they're not kind of listed anywhere. But generally these are tests to test your will, to test passion, and to test fear. I should also mention here that there is a Black Lodge, I mentioned, with black magicians. And they also try to train their own dark initiates, their own dark adepts. And these minor mysteries that I'm describing are the same for both the White Lodge and the Black Lodge, to a degree. So the Black Lodge will want to train you to test with tests of fear, and tests of passions, and tests of will as well as the White Lodge. Why? So with fear, it's obvious. For the White Lodge, there are certain places in the astral where to get to a realm of light, you need to pass over great abysses, great dark abysses, and you can't have the fear to, you know, if you have fear when you're going over the abyss, then you can't cross it, then you fall in. So you can't have fear you can't be dominated by fear. You have to overcome your fear. That's why you have certain things like there are certain, what is it called? Is it called chud? Ch? In Tibetan Buddhism, there's a very extreme form of meditation called chud. It's spelt C-H-O-D, but the O has umlauts on it. And a lot of these meditations are to do with like visualizing demons eating you, or the whole kind of thing is you're supposed to use fear in your meditation. Like you go to a graveyard and you meditate, or you go to the mouth of a cave at night and meditate with your back facing the cave, so you hear all these weird sounds, because sometimes, you know, and there's animals around, and you just have to keep meditating, even though you're in a state of fear, because the whole thing is, you know, fear kind of brings clarity, and you have to triumph over that. But the idea I'm trying to hit here is you need to have dominion over your fear. You need to, you know, if you fear, you can use fear as a tool. It's a tool for clarity to cut through the mind. But you need to have dominion over your fear, or else you can't operate. And this is the same for Black and White, because in the Black Lodge, if you say, you know, I don't want to teach people to get initiated into the Black Lodge, but if you get connected, if you make a pact with some kind of dark entity and you get connected to something demonic and grotesque, if you get connected to that thing permanently and you fear it, think of that situation. Think of how useless you would be in that situation. That thing would just dominate you and you just die. You know, I remember, you know, I like looking up different kind of books online and kind of subscribing to certain book lists. Like, you know, the Wiser Antiquarian book list is always good. Shout out to Wiser. They've got some of the best publication book lists. They get really rare books sometimes and they publish them. And they publish their kind of like monthly book list, and you go through it, it's like, oh shit, they got some good stuff. And I always used to see these books pop up in a lot of book lists online by a guy called Andrew Cumley. And they were always, he looked a little bit black magic-y, kind of like EA Coating black magic-y. And I kind of look at his stuff, and they'd sell for like thousands of bucks. Like Andrew Cumley, this kind of thing for $3,000. I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, who is this guy? And I remember looking him up, and it turns out he's dead. And he died really young, like 33 years old. And he just died really weirdly. Like, he just came home one day, and he was just in his car in the driveway, and he just died. And it's just like, was a brain aneurysm or heart attack, or he just stopped. I just remember reading that, and then, like, looking at all his books on, like, black magic and thinking, this guy tapped into something that he could not control. And he just got home one day and he got like choked out by a fucking demon in his car, and he just died of and it's physically, what does that look like? It just die of an aneurysm randomly at 33 years old in your driveway. Bruh. That guy failed in the internal worlds. So that guy was someone who was clearly being initiated into the Black Lodge, but he failed. He failed. In the White Lodge, you fail a test, and, you know, you just wake up the next day and you're an idiot. And then you try and try and try again. You try, and eventually you develop yourself and you move into the internal worlds. With the Black Lodge, you fail, you fucking die. You're a loser, and then you're a slave to the Black Lodge for the, you know, several eternities. You know when you read, like, books? And you read, like, kind of demonic kind of grimoires, and there are these demons, and it's like, and this demon, you know, rules a certain level of hell, and he has a legion of 10,000, and this demon is a prince of hell, and he has, you know, several legions of hundreds of warriors, and it's like, who are these legions? Who are the servitors of the demons? If you make a pact with a demon, and then you die in an unfavorable circumstance like that, what they don't tell you, what you don't understand is those pacts invert. And so instead of you being the master of the demon becomes the master of you. That's what, when you read those books and it's like, this demon has a legion of, you know, 10,000 simpy servitors. Those simpy servitors are like 10,000 people who started doing black magic, made a pact with the demon. And yeah, the demon becomes your servant, but for how long? How long are you going to live? 100 years, 80 years, 60 years? When you die, that's pittance for a demon who lives outside of time and space in the astral world. That demon's just going to be like, cool story, bro. I'll wait 60 years. I'll wait 80 years. You're going to die, and then when you die, you're going to become one of my servants. That's what happens to these people. That's who those servitors are. So that happens. So you need to conquer your fear, whether you're in the Black Lodge or the White Lodge. You need that attribute. With passions, it should be obvious. You can't be a white magician and be dominated by your passions here or there, or, you know, you just awaken faculties and you get seduced by someone. I mean, look at politics. How easy it is to control politicians through their sex. And then what? And then, you know, you have them in your back pocket, and you can control a politician because you have a video of him doing some gross shit in a frickin' motel with friggin' candy from, I don't know, candy from the club down south or whatever. So it's like, it's the same thing with white magicians. You cannot not have dominion over your passions. And the same holds true for the Black Lodge. In the Black Lodge, I think the understanding is more something like, if you have self-control in a situation where other people don't, you can have power over those people. So having self-control in certain moments where other people don't is advantageous. So that understanding needs to be had, needs to be developed, and needs to be something that's developed even in the Black Lodge. So the Black Lodge also tests for that. So fear, passion, and of course willpower. You need to be able to do things. That's why there are some, if you have some dreams where it's like a tall person comes, or you get given a test for something, or like you get told to bite something, or you get given something and you have to take it somewhere, or you get like there's an old man and you have to take him to a temple or something. It's like you get given a task and you need to complete that task. So this is a test of willpower, a test of continuity. Can you do things? Do you have capacity? Like, what do the black magicians want? Do they want the simpy incel who sits in front of his computer all day and doesn't even have a job, who's a complete neat? Or do they want to convert the guy who, you know, is on a trajectory, a path to become, you know, perhaps a prominent politician in 20 years? Who do you think they're going to choose? The white magicians don't care. To them, whatever this sounds ultra harsh, but to initiates who are awake, to initiates who are going up, not down into the abyss, to the initiates and the beings and angels and gods who are going up on the ladder of creation, moving back towards the absolute. When they look at down at Earth, a world war to them is like looking at leaves falling from a tree. They are beyond good and evil. They're beyond duality. So for them, once again, they just see us as a flower bed, and we're seeds. If we begin to develop, they may help us. They can help us, and they do help us. That's the whole Buddhist cosmology of beings that have compassion for mankind. There may also be beings that are indifferent as well. And then there are the beings that hate us. They're the demons. All demons are really just black magicians from ancient epochs who have developed themselves. They're all, you know, humans are seeds that can sprout into many different things, that have many different potentials. You can develop into a god, you can develop into a demon, or you can do like you can go Buddhist annihilation route, and you can just completely annihilate your ego, your sense of self, your identity, everything, completely annihilate everything and just reabsorb yourself into the absolute. There's that path as well. In the path of development, of the path of magic, the path of this kind of mystical path, what you're really doing is you are annihilating your defects to a certain point, but you're really regenerating yourself backwards to a point before the fall. Before the fall of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, but that's just symbolic, from before the fall in Lemuria, to when we're once gods, to before the fall, you know, when we had powers, when we were godlike. You're regenerating yourself to that point, and then from that point you're going up even further, doing the work we should have done instead of falling. But there is another work where instead of going back to before the fall, they just go to before existence, before even entering existence. That's the path of like Buddhist complete annihilation. The bardo work, to just annihilate your ego in between the bardos, in between life and death. That's what that path is. So some people just check out of creation altogether. They're just sick of angels and demons and just want to get out. That's also technically a legitimate path. Completely legitimate. So these are certain tests that we go through if we are developing, if we are working spiritually. You can do it in the Black Lodge. You can do it in the White Lodge. Please don't do it in the Black Lodge and just become another fucking douchebag who's cucking humanity from moving up on the ladder of creation. But fundamentally, what happens when you reach the end of this? At the end of this, it's said that you are initiated into the White Lodge internally as a servant, and you become kind of a servant in the astral White Lodges. Further, here you need to awaken. You need to awaken your consciousness, your powers, maintain yourself in the astral realm. Maintain yourself in one dimension, so that then you can have a kickoff into another dimension. It is urgent to acquire the power to maintain yourself in the astral so that you can be instructed in the astral. Because in the astral, there are all the masters who have ever lived. You know, all people who have attained mastery and then died. You know, you can meet the old alchemists, meet Paracelsus, you know, meet all the immortal Rosicrucians, or I don't know, all the ancient philosophers. You know, and maybe you're into Taoism, and some ancient Taoist immortal is in the astral waiting for you. You can connect. You can find their teachings, and you read their teachings, and you start doing their work. And then that master who you're reading from, you kind of connect to them via the sincerity of working with the teachings that they've given. That happens. Even like gods from ancient traditions really were once men. So Odin, working with certain, Norse mysteries, can actually connect you to these ancient things. Working with the Greek mysteries, working with, whatever. Working with whatever. Just do something. Work, try to awaken, try to get into the astral world. This is what true esoteric initiation is. And it's so hard. It is so hard. It is a life's work. But if you can do it, you can get to a save point. You can gain continuous consciousness. And then if you do need to come back, you come back with memories. You come back in a better place. And then you don't fall into the magic circle. You don't fall into counter-initiation. You don't fall into the black magician tricks. Anyway, this is a long one, and I ranted a lot. But I hope you understood the importance of this understanding. Understanding a little bit more about ceremonial magic and what the black magicians do in the world and the mechanics behind it, and also the idea of esoteric initiation and that this is the thing we need to aim towards. So, anyway, maybe next week I'll talk about more techniques or something. Ciao.